And you can take over and share your screen or do whatever whenever you're ready.
Okay. My name is James Yokoboski. My title is Senior Developer at Defiant. Defiant's actually the company that makes Wordfence. Um, and well, I'll hit this in a slide, but I usually like to preface whenever I'm talking to a WordPress specific group is that it's probably been 10 years since I actually ran and maintained a WordPress site of my own, and I don't do a lot of work on the Wordfence plugin code directly. Now, I do spend a lot of time digging around in the guts of plugins, doing vulnerability discovery, dealing with malware analysis on infected web servers and things. But I always like to warn people I can figure out and fix whatever problem you're having, but I'm not nearly as good at it as the actual customer service people. Just a fair warning that I'm happy to do it, and they'll usually reply to me pretty quickly that I can hit them up on Slack, but it's I'm not always going to be as quick and authoritative about that as ordinarily would be. Let me see if I can get the screen share going here.
Should be at the bottom. There you go.
That showed up. Ooh. Chat out of the way. That wasn't what I meant to hit at all.
That happens a lot. You find yourself clicking on random things.
Yeah, I'll just click on everything. Well, I always forget that Zoom's going to make everything stay in front of me. I know it doesn't show up on the shared screen, but
right.
Yeah. So what I was asking, what kind of stuff I was going to talk about, and who comes to a lot of the meetups is I end up talking to a lot of like actual developer groups when I'm doing security stuff. Either I'm at some sort of a hacker convention, or I'm meeting up with people at programming boot camps and that kind of thing. And I was warned that this is a little more of a spread, and there's a lot of people who are just getting into WordPress and setting things up and using it as a publishing platform that aren't necessarily trying to be software developers in the free time. So so I went ahead, and this thing is a little more focused on like practical user knowledge. I'm gonna in the actual presentation, I'm happy to get into the technical jibber jabber with anybody afterwards, but I tried to keep a lot of the jargon down. This is really geared at like what you should do when you're setting it up, when you're looking for plugins and themes, how to vet those things, how to get your website up and created and running in a way that's maintainable for you and will stay more secure than average anyway. And here's the slide for me. Like I said, I work for Defiant, make Wordfence, and that's my day-to-day. Right now, I've really been writing a lot of internal tooling. I, at one point, was in charge of all the actual malware signature, the malware detection rules that we send out. I'll write firewall rules. If you follow our blog or anything, I've been involved in a lot of the recent vulnerabilities that we've done write-ups on. And so figured I should start because this is actually one of the first questions I get when we're telling people about security stuff is why bother? Like, who's looking for me? I run a landscaping business in the South Hills. Like, who in the world is actually going to be trying to commit cyber crime against me? And I think the real root of that problem is that it's inconvenient. Like, doing things in a more secure way, I'm not going to lie, is usually a pain in the ass. It requires more work, it's more effort, it's extra steps you have to go through. But that's where I really like this quote from a guy who's head of security at an energy company in Australia, is security is always excessive until it's not enough. So it might be, an extra half hour out of your week doing, logging in more securely, using multi-factors and stuff. But that first time your website gets hacked and all your customers are now worried, is our credit card info gone? Is our data gone? If you're involved with news organizations or publishing, they spam your email list or something. It can take you months or years to fully recover from the damage of, not spending 20, 30 minutes a week worried about your login security. And that's where it comes down. This stuff isn't targeted. The big hacks you hear about on the news, sure. but the majority of website hacks aren't. It's based on opportunity. I like to do physical analogies. Is a store with an unlocked door and nobody watching the shelves, people are just going to grab stuff and walk out because they can. On the internet, it's sort of the same situation, but those people are robots. There's no human involved in most of the attacks that go on and that we're seeing all the time. This I pulled off of our website earlier today. It's north of 4 billion individual attacks that have happened in the past 30 days. Nearly 100,000 separate IP addresses over that time period we've had blocked at one time or another. These are all automated attack drones. Like I didn't do the math on the 4 billion, but that's going to be hundreds a second a lot of times. The important thing to realize is that this isn't targeted at you, it's targeted at everyone. The analogy, like, I don't know how many people were in here, I lived on South Side for a long time, that there's always people breaking into cars along the whole block. It's basically that exact same thing, just applied at a global scale. And really the reason that affects everyone even more is it's because they use those now new hacked websites as a platform for more attacks. So it's kind of like they stole a baseball bat out of your car and are now using that to mug people on the street. You really want to do as much as you can to try to cut down on this, because it makes the entire internet actually a safer, more reliable place. So, what are you supposed to do about that? By far, the most common, and I don't remember last time we did stats on this, but it's somewhere north of 80% of every website hack, every sort of breach that happens everywhere, is from compromised credentials. Somebody's got access to your password, you fall for a phishing attack, another service you used 5 years ago got hacked and they stole their password list. If you can get your login secured, you're going to stop a huge proportion of attacks before they even get started. And there's really, 4 things that I would suggest to everybody that essentially makes this a non-issue in your life. And one of the first ones is to forget about the word password. Think of it as a passphrase. That length trumps everything else when it comes to being hard for somebody to actually crack it. Without getting into brute force numbers and cryptography and stuff, just remember longer is better. It's also easier to remember, which a lot of people think sounds counterintuitive. But do you think 8XQR capital L exclamation point @ $J is easier or harder to remember than something like my mother's least favorite cat was Steve too? In terms of the password complexity and somebody breaking into it, the second password is probably even better, and it's something that you don't have to memorize this long series of disconnected terms. That I call those the silly complexity rules, because they do help sometimes. They also can hurt. And if you would just double the length of your password, you're better off anyway. The thing when I was talking about other service providers being hacked and losing your password, Troy Hunt, he's another Australian guy, which I realize I have a lot of themes going with here, runs this website called haveibeenpwned.com. If you haven't heard about that or gone to it, I encourage you to, even while I'm talking, go to the website, put an email address in. He basically collects stolen password lists and from breaches posted on the internet. People send them to him surreptitiously. And makes it available to check if your account's been used in a breach. And a newer feature that he's added is the ability to actually check passwords themselves if they're contained in that breach. So one of the reason he wanted to do that, a newer feature in a lot of security tools, is to check that when you sign up or when you make an account somewhere, that password hasn't been used, because those millions of attackers or automated attacks that are happening right now are working through that entire list. And even if your password is the 3 billionth one down there, well, I already showed that means in less than a month, there's the potential of somebody getting into your site with it. And that gets into not reusing credentials. Basically, you just need to change your passwords on things. If you have a hard time remembering it, password managers can help a lot with that. They can also generate them if for some reason you have trouble memorizing them. Stuff just leaks out of your head. Writing them down, a lot of people are very firmly against. At work, you probably don't want to do that. At home, I imagine you've got medical documents, financial stuff, bank statements, all sorts of sensitive things around. You can write them down. Just make sure you treat that piece of paper like it's these other documents that you would keep locked up. You'd make sure to shred or burn when you throw them out. That stuff is sensitive and important and can be just as damaging as somebody, stealing a check in the mail or something. And the really last one is to use multi-factor authentication, or a lot of times you'll hear it as two-factor authentication. It is unbelievably effective. So much so that this was actually a study that the effects of just came out less than a month ago, like 2 or 3 weeks ago. Google published this. They did this with other researchers from NYU and the University of California, San Diego. And this arrow that I have pointing to, I guess, the left side of the screen is the type of 2FA that most of the time you'll be familiar with. You get a text, that's the SMS code. The on-device prompt is if you've ever had like Google or Apple pop up with a little code like, did you sign in here? And a security key would be like a YubiKey, or if you use Google Authenticate or some other sort of OTP application. You might notice that stops 100% of automated attacks over the year the study ran. It stops nearly 100% of phishing attacks, no matter what mechanism you're using. Literally just having 2FA means that basically you no longer have to worry about automated password attacks. You no longer have to worry about phishing attacks. That by itself is huge. And even dropping down to the targeted attacks, that's somebody who's coming at you. That means there is usually a human involved. It means somebody will have done research into it, that this is a typical criminal coming at you. This is, modern day versions of different kinds of fraud being done electronically. Even in the least secure one, if you guys have seen all the SMS, what do they call them? The SMS stealing attacks. They're the SIM card switching attacks that have been in the news over the past week or so. Despite that, I mean, these are fairly sophisticated, very targeted attacks, and yet they're falling into that bottom 24% of this whole thing. It still would stop 3 out of 4 attacks coming against people just by having that SMS 2FA code. I cannot possibly stress enough how important it is to start adding these extra factors to every single account that you have. So once you've done that, honestly, you're already in like the 80th percentile. If you've got a good password, you've got 2 factors. That's how, somewhere around 8 out of 10 hacks happen on every WordPress site. That's how most home things get compromised. That's how most high-profile ones you hear about even happen. Other things for you, I mean, obviously we're remote right now. People are at home or coffee shop, wherever you are. You do want to remember to distrust wireless everything. You don't want to whip out your laptop and update that blog post or change the price on something on random public Wi-Fi, because it's laughably easy to set up fake access points to intercept traffic going on in a lot of those. I suspect a lot more people have like their Facebook accounts hacked by connecting through something like that than they'd probably like to admit. When you are out in public, and like I travel a lot and like doing this, set up some sort of a VPN. It's a virtual private network service. There's lots of good providers you can pay for. You can set up your own somehow on a provider somewhere. And as far as, again, this is going to be relatively rare, but there are exploits that come out over Bluetooth and NFC. Those are those different methods that you might use to connect to like AirPods or your phone uses for payment systems. That kind of attack just randomly in public with people setting them up on like tables in restaurants or in any sort of a crowded area like malls and stores, that's only going to get more common. It has happened in the wild, and it's going to continue. In that ballpark, it's also be mindful of who's around you. It doesn't matter if you have all the security in the world if somebody's just watching you type the password in or grabs the laptop and runs away. That's left out of a lot of these security talks, but you know, you can look up things from the FBI's had problems with this. Government security offices have problems where people leave laptops places or don't lock them when they go to the bathroom. You know, attacks don't always have to be crazy sophisticated. This one, we're going to circle back more in a WordPress specific context, but do not install everything you can find. Just don't. Even app stores, I don't care if you like Apple or Google or WordPress or any of these things, they do only a cursory look at whether those plugins, those pieces of software are doing anything malicious. It's really easy to hide all sorts of terrible behavior in there, even if they are looking pretty hard. So when you're going to download something, don't just search for a word and click on the first thing and download it. And if that doesn't work, click on the next one, download it. Actually look at who wrote it, who published it. When in doubt, find their website as officially as you can, and then follow a link from there, because it's also getting more common for people to pretend to be the legitimate version. That's because as there have been crackdowns, they realize it's easier to have a similar name and get people by accident than it is to actually try to break into something. On the flip side, you basically always do want to run updates for software you already have installed. Not updating has been a plague in the WordPress community in particular. I've seen estimates talking from their former head of security at a conference. He said something like 84% of hacks prior to them putting auto updating in were completely cut out, because it was just people would set them up and leave them running for years and never go back and update them. And one of the last things that sort of ties in with more physical security, when I say use encryption, a lot of times it might be called a startup password or something on your phone. That's a good method for security from somebody physically stealing your device. Unfortunately, that's only getting more and more common. And as manufacturers like Apple and Google have gotten better about making it impossible to really get good resale value out of the phone itself, stealing the data off of the phone and using that to try to empty your bank account or to try to scam your friends and family members has become increasingly common. And I'm starting to see more tools to make this easier for sort of random Joe off the street to do. So it's probably going to get worse before any of that gets better. So this is supposed to be about WordPress, right? I've been sort of glossing over a lot of the WordPress specific things for just general security concepts that you can go with it. So getting into when you're setting up a WordPress site, in case I haven't thumped enough on this, get some sort of a login security plugin. There are pushes in WordPress core itself to get multi-factor auth built into it to have better sort of have I been pwned checks or length and complexity requirements in there. But they aren't yet, and at the speed a lot of those changes happen in core, it may be years yet before they do. There's lots of good options. I kind of have to plug, just a few days ago, we actually released a separate standalone version that only does this login security plugin ourselves. It's under the Wordfence label. It really, this is probably the single best thing you can do to protect your website from most attacks. This should be one of the first things that you install, some sort of login security whenever you set up a website at this point. The next is checking sources. Another huge portion of attacks happen because people have installed a plugin that already had a known vulnerability. They install one that is old and just hasn't been looked at for a while. They, in some particular cases, the actual plugin has been bought or taken over in some way by a malicious actor, and they're inserting spam directly into your website on there. There was a Mason Soiza, if you want to read up us going through different things with British authorities catching somebody involved with that. That's like I usually say, remember what they taught you in school about not believing everything on the internet, is people are lying everywhere there. You really have to pay a lot of attention to the sources when you're getting that, even when you're paying for work. And I'll go over some ways you can do that without necessarily being able to review the code and things yourself in a second. And the other is to remember that the security degrades. Like when you install a brand new WordPress installation, you put your login security plugin on there, you're in pretty good shape. There's not a whole lot an attacker could do. It's not going to get hacked. You're free to change the colors and themes and put your content on there and you're fine. But, you know, a year or 2 years from now, there will probably be new vulnerabilities in it. You can't just leave these things forever and think it'll be fine. The more plugins you install, the more themes you install, the more custom code you have, the faster that sort of digital rot will set in on the site that you have running. That's where firewalls and other sort of security tools that you can install, that's really the niche that they're filling. Is they're doing a lot of what would be a lot of manual work for you, so that you're getting more of an alert that things are going to be a problem or something could have happened, instead of you having to manually go through this stuff several times a week. So yeah, it's kind of silly for me to tell you that you need to really evaluate tech sources, and I'm not going to try to go through everything I dumped here in the page. But one of the big ones that I've found is people just think that the tech is scarier, or like they say, I'm not a programmer, I don't know how to deal with this, I don't know what to do about this. Well, you know, I'm not a plumber or a carpenter either, but if something breaks in the house, you got to find somebody to work on it. You go through the exact same process. Ask around. You're in a meetup. Check and see who's a reliable designer, who's a reliable programmer that's not going to charge you twice as much and ghost you. Don't go looking for the bottom of the barrel, the cheapest you can get. Somebody who's really cheap and really available, just like in construction, that's kind of a bad sign for the quality of work that you're going to get. You can dig through, I've got some links and notes about sort of specific websites. You can look for complaints and references and searches you can dump into Google. But you really want to do that background work before you hire somebody, before you download something. Again, it goes back, don't just type in a keyword and download the first thing that pops up. When you have typed in a keyword, though, and you've got a list of things, sorry, I'm getting dinged at, is a big one that you can look for is just activity. It doesn't even really matter specifically what you see going on, well, as long as it's not a bunch of complaints, I guess. But you want to see that they're actually updating it. Everything in the WordPress repo has the version that it's been tested up to, the date that it's been last updated. You can look in the support forums and see, you know, are people leaving comments? How quickly do they get responses? That kind of stuff is a huge indicator that it's probably a safer option for you to go with, because if something comes up, you'll be covered. Popularity, which I don't usually like to recommend, is also good for this one. You might see it and think, oh, 500 people, 5,000 people, but there's tens of millions of users out there. So in the grand scheme of things, that's not really that many. Going for hosting providers, they especially will usually have support responses or service level agreements, SLAs. That's a legal protection, which is really important if your business is going to be dependent upon this in some way. You want to make sure that it's there. You probably want to try their support out before you start signing however many thousands a year over to them by just sending and asking questions. Do it within the first month or two, where you can usually get out of the contract if need be. Because if your website's hacked, or if it's even just down for some reason, that's where you really don't want to be on the hook for 30 or more hours, because they're not actually going to reply to you. If you haven't heard like 5 nines and things as a metric, that's a lot of times how they'll refer to uptime. 5 nines means that you have about 5 minutes of downtime expected throughout the year. So as you get down to about 3 nines, I think that I want to say is somewhere around 8 hours. So it's stuff to be aware of, that these are things you can actually get solid agreements from hosting providers, at least, not as much on plugins and themes. But this is stuff you can get in writing that helps a lot. When you're looking at them, look over change logs and search for like vulnerability or security on plugins and themes, because everybody has them. If they say they don't, they're just lying or don't know about them yet. And you want them to be honest with you when that happens. The worst thing that can happen is where you get into like Equifax sorts of situations where they lie about it for months, and who knows how many people lost their identity because they didn't tell them that there was an issue, or didn't tell them there was a problem. How many websites get hacked because people don't tell us all that they lost everyone's password, it lost everyone's emails. That goes into evaluating the people behind whatever software that you're running. If you're able to, you can do technical reviews over the code for open source software. Ripstech is a company. The guys are pretty cool. They did a lot of post-grad research and static PHP analysis. They also have created a website specifically for scoring WordPress plugins. That can still be a little hard to follow if you're not used to code and what some of those vulnerability types and things mean, but can give you a good idea. If they've got a score of like 99% bad, that's pretty good hint that maybe you don't want to install it on your website. Closed source software, you obviously can't review ahead of time. You got to go on the other metrics, but never assume that it's not going to have those problems because you paid a bunch of money for it. That's just not reliable at all. And while I'm sure nobody in here would ever pirate anything, I can tell you from experience that the null plugins and themes almost universally have some sort of malware already embedded in it. You're infected the second that you install the thing, so just stay away from them entirely. Go with the regular WordPress repo, the first party sources with things, or even Envato, they're the ones behind Code Canyon and Theme Forest. They do a pretty good job of not letting just outright malicious software sit in there.
I'm going to just pop in 1 second real quick, James, because I know there's a lot of people, especially the newer ones, excuse me, bud, that are not familiar with the terms nulled or pirated. And so basically, especially in the WordPress world, what that means is there's like premium plugins. Like I use Gravity Forms, and I love Gravity Forms, right? But you can't, there's no free version of it. So to get it, you have to pay the license fee to get access to the code. And there are sites that exist that are like, oh, you can get a copy of Gravity Forms for only $5, right? Or I think there's like people selling it on Fiverr and stuff like that. And so basically what those people typically have done is maybe they legitimately got a copy of the code, but then they installed some malware, some nasty script in it, and then they're trying to resell it to you for, less. So the lower price gets you interested in buying it from them as opposed to directly from the developer. And then you have no idea what they put in it. So that is what the Null software is. So you'll see that a lot of times if you're looking around on things. But I know that there's a lot of websites that really kind of target the beginners that we tend to have a lot of in this meetup. And I just wanted to make sure they were familiar with that term.
Yeah, it is very important. A rule, I don't know if it's really a rule. It's something that I've noticed is very common. If you see a lot of Russian text and you're not searching in Russian and there's something WordPress related or software or something, do not download anything from that website. So far, I have a 100% hit rate with there being malicious software inside of literally everything on Russian WordPress websites like that. Now, these are mixed ones, right? They're like Russian websites that are targeting English users, not Russian websites for Russian people. That's something to be concerned about. You see a lot of the kanji characters, that's like Chinese and Japanese. That's the same thing. When they're mixed in with a lot of English search terms and things, that's largely hackers trying to get you to download stuff. Or I guess they could be trying to sell you something too, but usually it's to get malicious software on there. If you ever get a weird feeling about a website, if it has like an odd number of ads or something, the WordPress community in general isn't like that. So that should be a pretty good clue in that there's something wrong with what's happening in the site. And getting towards the end, since I do work for a company that makes a security plugin, I'm trying not to advertise too much in here. Some of that's because they didn't actually give me any ad slides, so you guys got off easy on that one. Here are some of the features that I'd recommend that don't require you to have a lot of technical knowledge and aren't hard to be able to compare side by side when you're actually looking for security plugins to fill things in. I'm going to go again with some sort of login protection, login security. This can be a standalone feature. It can be part of another, a wider security suite. But like that should be the very first thing that you look for and put in somewhere. The other thing that you want to see is routine, and they'll probably call it rule updates or a live feed or I guess those are the only two things coming to mind. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the plugin itself is going to be updated a lot, but that it's sending different rule sets. And those are little pieces of not quite code that define a way to detect malicious software. Like that can be bad plugins. That can be if a site gets hacked and there's backdoors installed. That can be if somebody's inserting spam onto your website somehow, to detect that kind of thing. And firewall rules, if there's a firewall included in the security software you have, that can block attacks through generic methods that they can detect things like cross-site scripting or SQL injections broadly, or they can be patching vulnerabilities even before the software gets updated. That's a lot of what our firewall set that people pay for is actually doing. Whenever we discover vulnerabilities, usually while we're contacting the actual developers, whoever makes the plugin, to get that updated, we can release a firewall rule immediately to our customers that will stop attacks from working even before the software gets updated. So that's why it's crucial that there's some easy, unattended way to send those things out a lot more frequently than you would normally want to be updating software. Like I said, that'll probably average out to several times a week. In extreme cases, it can happen several times a day. But that really all depends on how bad that day is for the security community. Most security plugins, you want them to have a lot of configuration options. You don't necessarily need to understand them all or have any idea even what some of them are when you pull it up and are looking at it, but it's a good thing that it has a lot of options, because the problem with trying to stop malicious behavior when you don't even know what the behavior might be yet is that we run into false positive problems. that might mean that you've installed a new plugin that you like using. It happens with Gravity Forms not infrequently. To have better interaction on your website, that you want to change the checkout page, or you've added some sort of new functionality for your users. That can end up looking like malware compared to what your site traffic was before. So you need to be able to sort of tune and adjust those settings when those little problems come up. That's IP blocking is a really straightforward one, where every once in a while, you forget to sign in and start hitting your admin page. A lot of things will actually block you at that point. So you want to be able to pull out your phone, go off, the 4G network, sign in, and unblock your own IP address. That kind of stuff, you'd be surprised. It just doesn't get put into some of the software, or it doesn't come up until you have complaints about it. Seeing that there's a bunch of config options is a good thing. Once you see there's a bunch there, I suggest looking for the documentation. Hopefully there's somebody writing clear, easy to understand explanations of what those are. And that can be really useful if you're comparing 3 or 4 different products to know what'll work best for you, to see that they have options, but if these two have about the same, but one's got a page explaining it a way you understand, that might be better for you. Going in with the rule updates, IP blacklists are really important. A lot of I'm trying to remember the exact numbers of our site. I want to say it's something like 2% of the IPs that we block are responsible for like 70 to 80% of the traffic. So blocking a handful of the most prolific attack sources will stop a huge amount of traffic. And what's nice about IP blacklists and things is this can be done really, really cheaply in terms of performance and impact on the rest of your website. Doing things like analyzing the actual requests and seeing the data getting sent between them, that's pretty involved. The IP address, the source that it comes from, is one of the first things that's sent, and is really easy to then just drop everything else that's coming in. It doesn't fire up WordPress even most of the time in Wordfence for a lot of those kinds of block lists. If you're on a hosting plan where you're getting billed by things like CPU time, that can make a pretty sizable difference, where up to 60% of the churn and requests a lot of times running on your website throughout a day could just be bots and malicious things poking at it. So it could actually save you a lot of money having a feature like that in there. The last sort of actual feature in the plugin is what kind of alerting methods. Can you get a text message? Can you get a phone call? Does it send you an email? Is it dependent upon your website? Because if something goes wrong, if you get hacked, if the site's down, you want to know about it, right? You don't want to have to wait until you sign back into your WordPress dashboard to see that there's been a problem on your website. You want that to proactively notify you. And that's, everybody has different communication methods, what'll work for you, what you actually pay attention to, but that's something that you want to look at and contrast against different ones. The last one, I think, it's a little less actually a part of the plugin and a little more about who makes it, but you want to see secure or community involvement. Security doesn't work if you're locked in a room all by yourself. I'm sure you're plenty secure, but you're also not doing anything. You have to be out there and interacting. Education and getting those change in habits, getting people to use better passwords, to use different factors. That education process is a huge part of actually making the entire internet and WordPress community more secure. And in a practical sense, if you have a problem getting it set up, if you do get hacked, if you just have some problem on your website, if there's a lot of community involvement and things, there's a support network for you. You're not going to be trapped out in the cold, lost and confused by yourself if something does go wrong. You can post on a forum, you can send emails, you can hit people up in chats, and you'll be able to get some sort of help when stuff actually does go wrong. And here's some little credits that I did rip off a template from Slides Carnival for this. I've got the different picture credits if you want it. I personally want to thank, thousands of anonymous hackers. I got into the hacking scene about 20 years ago. WordPress was a huge part of me doing that. It was really Wild West days prior to about 2010-ish. I was one of those faceless numbers in those sort of attack counts, but companies at the time were talking about, hundreds of thousands up to tens of millions was an unimaginably big number. And now we're seeing billions a month. The rate that this stuff is increasing is just incredible. So it's really becoming, things you do have to be aware of before you even get started on a website. And thanks. Hope that was helpful. I'm open for any questions, like I said, about stuff in this. If you want to talk about Wordfence, I can do the best that I can with stuff. I can't tell you a lot about the support network, the way that works in a lot of detail, or anything really.
Did I unmute myself? I did. Okay, good. Like, I'm going to be talking to myself. So you were talking about the Wordfence Login plugin, right? And I went and I found it on the plugin repo, Wordfence Login Security. So I'm going to drop that link in here for everyone, and which I really like because, I had a two-factor authentication login on my site. And then I got really tired of never being able to log in when I didn't have my phone. Well, actually, I think would be really interesting is if you can get a two-factor authentication that syncs that I could put into my Chrome browser. You know what I mean? I don't know. I feel like maybe there is probably some security issue there. But
there is a little bit. A lot of things like 1Password, when we were like I mentioned password managers.
Yeah.
1Password, I think LastPass, Authy, those all will have it combined and can autofill in your browser for you.
So I used to know a guy who was a system admin, and he told me to stay away from, he didn't like LastPass because it was scanning his passwords even when it wasn't going into LastPass. And I just don't really like, I don't know, I try to avoid those things that are scanning my system even when I tell them not to. So I don't use LastPass. So what I do use doesn't let me work with two-factor authentication. But, instead of the Authenticator app on my phone, or the other thing is I wish that there was that I could have two devices. You know what I mean? Like my phone and my tablet, because I'm likely to have one of them around me. But
Terry, you need Authy. It's an app. You download it on your computer.
Okay.
Because I was very annoyed by the two, having to have your phone or whatever.
Right.
But I just open up the app. It tells me what the site is, and I say yes, that's me, and it works.
All right.
And
Well,
you
maybe
can do it offline too, which is nice. So if you don't necessarily, you know what I mean, you're online, but you're not somewhere with a good connection.
Okay, cool.
I don't know. I think it's great.
So I did drop the link in the chat for the that was not the word I was trying to say. The login, Wordfence login plugin that James was talking about. Does anybody have any questions? Is anybody utterly confused? Did everybody learn something amazing new tip today?
I do see one in the chat there asking about the difference between Wordfence. Wordfence is what you would call an endpoint firewall. That just means that it runs on the actual server that's also the web server that's serving your website. And he's asking what, or Shannon, sorry, the difference between that and cloud-based firewalls like Security. Okay, I did get it right. Like Security or Cloudflare, or a lot of different options. There's there's two big concerns when you're looking at cloud-based versus sort of an endpoint-based firewall. The first is for distributed denial of service attacks, specifically if you're in an industry where there's going to be a lot of traffic coming at you, or you may be targeted for that sort of thing. Gaming is extremely common for that. You need either something worked out with your hosting provider or a cloud-based solution to insulate you from that. There's nothing that an endpoint there's nothing that your server or that anything at the endpoint can actually do. You need help at a network level to be able to stop one of those attacks. It can be a lot cheaper to use something like Cloudflare without actually paying for their security specifics. If you're on a host like OVH, a lot of them will have that built in for you. So you might already have that and not even know it. But it's important to know that matters because it needs to happen at the network level, not on your server. The other is that cloud-based stuff can be bypassed. So what you'll see a lot of times is that, because if I could actually draw a diagram, I don't think I have anything handy, but you can think of like the attackers at one side, your servers over at the other, and the cloud-based firewall is in the middle. That only works so long as the attacker's actually going through that thing in the middle. There have been innumerable ways people find to get around that, to get to the endpoint server, to find ways to hit it. A lot of cloud providers will still actually have you run an endpoint security solution or recommend that you run something locally anyway, because since they're not actually connected to your machine, they're however many internet hops away, they're not actually able to stop everything. And those are the sort of two big concerns and differences in a nutshell. It usually gets into pricing and more software architectural stuff going from there.
Very cool. I have a question about have I been pwned? So I've looked at it, and I think some of like my old passwords that I haven't used in forever are on there. But I've always found that I'm really hesitant to put in any of my current passwords because I feel like they're being collected in some other database somewhere, right? Where it's like, well, now we have more to try. If you
use I can't remember if it's in the login security plugin or not, but in the regular Wordfence plugin, and you can find other random tools that'll do this. Troy set up when we check to see if a password you're using is already in that list, you don't actually send that password to them. What you actually do is you hash that password and you send the beginning of that hash to Troy's servers, and then it sends you back a list of the rest of the hash. That is to say that all of the ones that start with those same numbers.
Right. So like the first 10 characters of the hash password, and whichever ones match that, and you can compare it.
Yeah, then he sends back, his server hits back with the 200 that start with those same 10 characters, and then you compare it, Yeah,
because it just never seemed like I like the idea of it, but it always seems like a really bad idea to, put my password into a place that's collecting passwords. And
It is, and there are fake ones out there that are I've seen a fake have I been pwned site that was set up to do exactly that.
Right. So, okay. We've got Shannon has another question. What is your opinion about manually blocking bots attacking the site using Wordfence Live Traffic Viewer and Blocker, or am I wasting my time?
I personally think I wouldn't necessarily say you're wasting your time, but it is unnecessary. If if they're being prolific enough, either on your site or across a bunch of sites, I can tell you for sure they'll go on a blacklist from us, and then we'll block it on everybody's site. And if they're not, and you can see the stuff happening and coming in, then it can be fun. I keep joking that I'm going to write code so you can play like Space Invaders and knock them off on the website, but it's not really necessary, and it shouldn't be necessary, because we're not doing our job very well if you have to be sitting there and manually blocking stuff all day long.
How often are the IP blacklists updated? Do you know?
We have a real-time one that's actually going to be giving you responses. I actually wrote the server for that. When stuff gets blocked and those come in, the plugins report to us that the IP has been blocked for X rule violation for whatever reason. When that happens, then I think this is an option you can enable. You can actually check on every request, and we will give you a yes/no response on them based on real-time metrics. I think it's a few times a day on the premium side, a few times a week on the free side. You'll get refreshes from our more involved analytics. That's all running in real time on our end. We just can't actually ship it out to millions of people at that same speed.
Gosh, I wonder why. That would basically be using up all the server resources just to keep the updates, just to keep the lists updated, which is not really what we want to do. Okay. Do you have any suggestions for a VPN, like a good, we'll say low-cost one, since that seems to be a popular request in the group for like low-cost options for things. But if for using something at coffee shops and whatever, I stupidly probably don't use one, but I was just looking and I found one that like integrates with Google Chrome browser, but I don't know anything about it. So like, how do you pick a good one?
For one that you would pay for, that pretty much has all instructions and everything out of the box for you, private internet access, or PIA, is one that I hear a lot. I know a lot of people use. They seem very solid. A lot of people like them.
Okay.
The actual cheapest option that you can go with is to get, whether you like OVH or Vultr or Linode or DigitalOcean, is to get like a $3 to $5 a month virtual private server. This is actually what I do. I have I think it's $295 a month that I pay for this server. I have up to 10 terabytes of unthrottled traffic that goes through this thing with OVH. And to look up, I'd have to dig out. There are scripts and things to set up, like OpenVPN, which is free open source software and is very oftentimes what you'll be using at a paid setup too. If you want to be a little more hipster about it, you could look at using like WireGuard or IPsec. Those are different, newer sort of protocols for VPN setups. It can be a little more work up front, but for the most part, since I've gotten it set up, it's very much plug and play and forget about it. Like, you're talking about a few hours getting it going, but now, for $30 a year or whatever it is, I pretty much have a server indefinitely to myself.
Excellent. Okay, I think we just have the one other question. Oh, we've got two. Shannon says, because I travel, I often use cloud-based Avast and Bitdefender, plus it helps for traveling. So I guess that's related to the VPN question. But then he also had a question about, what is your opinion about what settings to use for Wordfence throttling?
You mean trying to throttle incoming hits?
Yes.
That one can be kind of hard, because it'll depend on your visitors, right? If you've got like a lot of image galleries and things that people will tend to sort of click through and mindlessly scroll through pretty quickly, you're going to want to set that up a lot higher than you might think you do. But that's really just because people will sit there for half an hour and click through and, you know, look at every one of the 400 cat pictures that you have. If you've got more sort of long form articles and people are going to be sitting on a page reading for a while, you can drop it down. I would, to err on the side of caution, probably you don't ever really want to set it to less than about 5 to 10 per, I don't remember what the intervals on the plugin are, but like 5 to 10 per 30 seconds or a minute. Just because browsers will actually send several requests at a time when they load the page. So like it's going to be sending requests for the JavaScript, for the images, for the CSS and stuff, all at the same time. So even somebody normally browsing will actually be sort of have these sort of scatter patterns hitting against your server. Well, it'll be like 5 hits in a second and then nothing for 8 minutes.
Okay. We have thank you. That was helpful. Would you mind? Would you be able to send me the slides and we can share them in the Facebook group and stuff for anybody that wasn't quick enough to write everything down? Is that okay?
Yeah, I realized that I wanted to have the link, but I accidentally did it on one of the work accounts, and they don't let me share them directly from there. So I need to export it out and get it out so I can pass it around.
Well, if you want to send it to me, like I said, I can always upload it to our Gmail account, like for the meetup, and then we can, you know, share it from there. But yeah, because I know there was a lot of tidbits that I wanted, things I was looking at, especially the graph from for two-factor authentication. I was trying to write that down, the source down for that very quickly, and then you changed the slide on me.
Oh yeah, I can paste that link into the chat now too.
All right. Well, thank you so much, James, for joining us and virtually. This is fun. If anybody has any other requests for topics or has a topic that they would like to discuss, you kind of run your own meetup, that would be fantastic. Just let us know. I'm going to try to upload the recording for this so that it is available for everybody as well. And yeah, thanks everybody for being here. And I guess I'll say adios and go enjoy your nice spring night. I gotta go take my kid to swimming.
Goodbye.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, James. That was great. Good night.
Bye.